Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. Today we are joined by my friend and colleague, Brian Allen. Brian and I actually personal train our clients at the same independent gym space. And he's got one of the most incredible life stories that I've ever heard. So we both thought that it would be awesome to have him on the podcast to share his experience with you guys. And just provide some more insight into where he started and where he is now. So thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, man, thank you for having me, Marcus, man. It's a pleasure. And I'll start really quick. I don't hear it too often on your podcast, but, man, hats off to you, man. I really respect your hustle in regards to the podcast and what you've been doing. And everyone I've listened to has been amazing. So keep doing what you're doing, my brother.
Oh, thanks so much, man. That means a lot. Thank you.
For sure.
So for the folks that aren't familiar with you and sort of your upbringing and stuff, let's start at the beginning. Let's lay some groundwork. So where did you grow up, and how did that experience sort of look for you?
Yeah. I was, first and foremost, I was born in Canada. I was born in Hamilton, Ontario. We moved around quite a bit, lived there for about 5 or 6 years, and then we moved west to Victoria, and then I was in Victoria for about 5 years. So I left Canada when I was 10 and moved to the States. I grew up in LA. So my formative years were in Los Angeles, grade 6 up until through university or college. So mainly there, that's where I probably made my bones, so to speak, was in Los Angeles. I've always been Canadian through and through, especially now in these volatile times, considering what's going on in the U.S. But I grew up there, and I came back to Canada in 2000. So I've been back here 18 years now. 18 years.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So then you set up shop in California for a while, is that right? Or where did you go?
I did. My mom and dad. Yeah, my mom and dad both. My dad was a plumber, and my mom was a nurse, and she got her master's degree at UVic, and then she got a second master's at Pepperdine in LA. And my dad ended up working for the LA County Hospital, being a plumbing supervisor for, oh my goodness, he was there almost 30 years. And then my mom, she worked for the LA Unified School District as a nurse, and then she wanted to get into, she thought about maybe becoming a principal, but that never panned out. But I got 2 brothers. One lives in Toronto, and one is living in Maryland, but we all grew up in LA, and it was just one of those places that I miss in the fact that, weather-wise, and I don't have anything bad to ever say about Los Angeles. It's a big city. Things happen in big cities. Vancouver's nowhere near as big. But we're seeing our own share of drama, so to speak, here. But, people always say, oh, LA was so crazy. And it's, oh, yeah, there's craziness, but there's crazy in LA. There's crazy in New York, Chicago, any city where there's millions of people. There's always going to be some type of craziness, so to speak. But, I never had nothing bad to say about Los Angeles. I had an amazing time, played football there, played college football there, and I had a good time, man. But, But, I came back to Canada, not really by choice, but and we'll get into that. But I'm glad I'm back. Love Canada, love where I'm living. I wouldn't give it up for the world. So if I could, arrange to kind of have places in both, maybe one day, and maybe I would arrange that. But for now, where I'm at here is awesome. So I'm good.
Nice, man. So, I mean, touching on, like you said, you had a good time down there for sure in the U.S. and stuff that. And touching on that craziness, tell us a little bit about, like, you had a really supportive parents and all that sort of stuff, supportive siblings and all that, but things happen, one thing leads to another, and you can kind of get off track in some way. So touch on a little bit of that for us.
Yeah, it's amazing. I come from a middle-class family, so I never wanted for anything. It's not when folks hear my story later on in the podcast, usually when you hear stories like that, it's from youngsters that were grown up in the projects or come from little means at all. So I didn't have any of that. My mom and dad made great money. We weren't rich by any standard, but I didn't want for anything. I mean, I went to a private school. I was a good student. I chose to go to a small college, Santa Monica College, when I graduated. But I was accepted into UCLA, but it would have been expensive. Got into UC Berkeley. Got into Morehouse, some major universities, but it was my choice. I kind of fought tooth and nail not to leave LA. Why? I do not know. It was one of those things where I loved what I was doing, and I'm like, I don't want to go to the East Coast, or I don't want to go to Morehouse. But it was one of those things where it was a choice, and again, we'll get into it, that I made. And it's interesting because, I'm 51, so, getting into what I got into many years ago, it was almost trendy. And I'm not saying it, when we get into it, it's not saying it's right, but it was one of those things where it was almost like, man, this is, what they're doing, selling drugs, which we'll talk about. And that lifestyle was cool when I used to see it from afar, because I was playing football, that was my thing. But, friends of mine had money and nice cars. I'm like, oh man, that's kind of cool. And there wasn't that hype and that information out there like there is now in regards to how bad and the consequences that we all know now. In the 80s, it was just coming in. That's when Nancy Reagan was in, no to drugs, but it was all new. So, and then again, it was, even the police were, there wasn't huge time given, jail or huge sentences and things like that back then. So it was easy for kids to get into it, but it still was a choice. So, I knew right and wrong, but it was one of those things. I had friends that were involved. I got into it. The numbers were amazing. So I'm like, I'll give it a go, so I just wanted to make that clear that my mom and dad were amazing. I didn't come from nothing. It was a choice that I made, and then I now regret, but I've learned. And this is one of the reasons why I want to give back. I want to get out there and talk to folks, not necessarily just about my story that you and I talked about before, but more about decisions and choices. And it's tough because kids, when you're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, you feel invincible, man. Especially when you're a guy. It's just in our genetic makeup. So you feel like you can just get away with anything. I'm sure that when the time comes and I talk to students or kids or whatever, I'm sure I'll have a group of them will be like, oh, man, you just got caught, man. You were slipping. I'll never get caught. There's no way. And this and that. You're old. I'm sure I'll hear some of that. But if I can touch on some kids, whether it's one or two, then I feel that I've kind of given back because, it was a blessing, and getting caught up in the system, which we'll talk about in the States, it's scary. People are now seeing globally what kind of, in my view, what corruption kind of looks like. We won't get into the political side of it, but things aren't great down there, man. There's divisiveness down there, and it's becoming more and more whenever Trump talks, and if I can get out there and give some positive based on my experience, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And your outlook at this point is it's incredible. And that's part of the stuff that I want to touch on too. So what was your you said that some of your friends were in that game, but what was your first sort of step into that drug game? Where did it sort of kick off for you and where did you make that decision?
Yeah, it was actually in LA. It's interesting. When I got into it, it was probably, we'll say mid 80s, 1986. And it was already pretty saturated, believe it or not. There was already, LA's got the gang thing, and of course back then it was the drug thing. So people had their areas that they controlled, so to speak. So you couldn't very well just go into, and it hasn't changed probably much now, but you just can't go into certain areas, certain corners on the block or whatever, and just start selling. But there was an area where I grew up where it was okay. There was a number of people that were using drugs, and very well-known people, believe it or not. I grew up in an area where people like, I don't want to say too many names, but amazing singers, like famous, that were strung out on drugs, and we were selling them drugs. Marvin Gaye, I'll say that because he's passed, may he rest in peace. But his dad lived just literally 5 minutes from my house, and he used to hang out when I was quite young in this Second Avenue Park that I grew up in. And he passed away because he was using drugs, and he got to a point where his dad and they just had their issues, and he unfortunately got killed. But it was mainly just street corners. I got into it, bought some from a friend that I grew up with that was selling at a higher level, bought a sack from him and made some money and did that for a few months. And then a buddy of mine, a really close friend of mine, was traveling out of town and up to Seattle. And at that point, there was a huge exodus of LA, not all gang members, but people in the game that were traveling, whether it's Seattle, whether it's Nebraska, whether it was Oklahoma, you name it. There was, if you can read up on the history, but there was a huge exodus of when we were able to get those drugs for so cheap all over the U.S. A lot of LA people went and just sold drugs. So Seattle worked for me. Basically, I was getting, for instance, like an ounce or a kilo of cocaine for for $10,000, but I could sell that in Seattle for 30. So it was numbers. It was almost at that age where it's a no-brainer. This is
absolutely
easy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was almost the sad thing about from when I never used the drugs. I smoked a little weed here and there, obviously, but so when I was young, I did all that stupid stuff, but I never used. But it was amazing how just the numbers got me, just got me addicted to making that money, and then you become addicted to making money, and because it's so easy. You don't have to be very smart. All you have to do is have the product, and people will come, and that's how it was. Again, I have no idea how. I'm assuming it's very similar still to this day, but a lot harder because people are more informed. But back then, the information and the awareness wasn't there, especially in Seattle, more in LA then, but still not like it is now. But Seattle was green. And when I say green, it was very new to people coming into the town and selling drugs. Cops were not aware of that. And in Vancouver had that many years, maybe 10, 15 years ago as well. So it was wide open. So that's the reason why a lot of us were traveling out of town because, again, LA was saturated already. So we said, okay, well, let's find out where we can go, where we can make money. And that's what we did.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the cocaine, the product just essentially just sort of sells itself, right? It's not a hard sell. People try it, they love it, and then, they want some more.
Totally, no matter what. And then the thinking, which is sad, was if they don't buy it from me, they're going to buy it from someone else. Because, you have a conscience. I know I did. I consider myself a good guy. I've learned my lesson and have my regrets about doing that. But people have asked me, like, man, didn't you feel bad about the person that you knew had a family, didn't have any money? I said, I did. I have a conscience. I was raised right. But then the addiction would take over. Well, I said, well, if he doesn't buy it from me, he's going to go down the street anyway, so he might as well buy it from me.
Right.
And I work all that. He's a grown man or she's a grown woman, and so it's sad. It's sad. It's a game that I wish wasn't around for kids to get involved in. But again, it is an addiction. It's no different than someone who's strung out on drugs. When you're getting $1,000, there were days, Marcus, when I got to a point where I had a group of guys and I had, like, say, for instance, what you would call a spot. So a spot's where people would come and buy drugs, and I would be the guy that would make sure that the drugs were available. So I had a guy working there. And there were times where I made 10, 20 grand a night. It was insane. So when you're making money like that, you feel even that much more invincible.
Right.
I had a nice car, I had clothes. No one can tell me anything, girls. It was, you're blinded by foolishness, right? And then you get caught up, and it's just a matter of time before you get caught or someone tells on you or you get killed or whatever the case may be. So, and now, and this is the reason why I want to specifically speak to kids and parents. Now it's even worse because of social media. Everyone has a camera. Everyone has some ability to film what's going on. So there's no way. And when you're dealing with the drug game, you cannot make money on your own. You have to trust someone. And that someone has to trust someone who probably knows who you are. There's no way you can make money otherwise. So it's a matter of time, and I never was at a level where I was a cartel or, or a mobster or whatever. So I didn't have surveillance and all that. I was just thinking about that day making thousands of dollars. And then eventually I got caught.
Yeah, man. And that's a super strong pull there when you're making that much money, on a daily basis. And then you compound that over the course of months and years. That's massive amount of cash.
Massive amount of cash. And you're young. You have no idea what to do with it. You're just spending money. I remember going to the mall and just, buying this and buying clothes and pants and shoes and Foot Locker. Believe it or not, I was maybe 19 years old at the time. They would call me, man, when they got a new shipment of shoes. Hey, Big B, man. Hey, get some shoes in, man. I know you want some, man. I'll be right there.
That's awesome. That's
I'm
awesome.
Out with 10 boxes of shoes. Who does that?
Right.
Unless you're like Justin Bieber or, or Usher or something like that with big money. Drake. That's all legitimate, but it's like, it's craziness, man. But then again, it's an addiction. So you're loving that. And you're walking through the mall and girls are checking you out. I'm like, yeah, I got my box. They know I got big money, got a nice car. Man, at the time, it was like, that's not the love, right?
Totally, man. And so you were about 19 at that point. And how long did this go on before, like you said, you ran into some complications with the law and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's amazing. You always think it was a long time, but the run, for me anyway, was no more than a year or two. So I'm trying to remember, I was probably, I had gotten in trouble and did some county time for like a month. I think it was like 45 days, right? That was my first, I'd never been in trouble before. Got arrested. They didn't catch me with anything. Did my 45 days, got out. To me, it was almost like slap on the wrist. And the thing is, what's crazy about that is that you honestly feel like you've been given a badge of honor. You know what I mean? So it's and that's where it's at. So, oh man, yeah, I've been to jail, man. You know, I'm the shit. You know what I mean? Because you're catering to that crowd, not the good crowd. You know what I mean? And that's because that's how you're living. You're living with guys that are all selling drugs, guys that are gang members and all that. So it's like, oh yeah, you went to jail? Yeah, you were solid, man. So that was probably, I think I was 21 then, and then got out, didn't stop. Here lies the addiction. And then I got caught when I was 92, 93. So I would have been 23 maybe, Marcus? I'm trying to remember, man, sorry.
In that range, yeah.
In that range. And that's when it was federal case. And that's the big boys, right? And then I was given 10 years, and I did 8 years for the actual charge was attempted possession with intent to distribute. They didn't catch me with anything. And this is where the feds are powerful in all being. They, I was using the mail service. A buddy of mine, we were using FedEx and all that back in the day, UPS, and then it worked, and that was very common. Stupid when you think about it now, but and I'm thinking I'm like brilliant. Say, man, we need to change the mail service. Let's use, like back then, I don't know if they have DHL here in Canada, but DHL was pretty big down in the States. I said, yeah, use DHL, change it up, change it up. So, oh yeah, I'll change it up. And my buddy uses the U.S. Postal Service, right? So I'm like, oh my God. So next thing you know, I was arrested. So I go to pick up what I think is the package. Next thing you know, I go in the house where the package was delivered. Cops are there, SWAT team. I'm throwing on the ground. I had a bucket of chicken, Popeye's chicken, the chicken going everywhere. It was great. I had plans to go to the movie that night. My car was all cleaned up. I was looking all clean, so I thought. And then it was a nightmare. So I was caught. I was 92. And then I was given 10 years. And that was my plea bargain, basically, because if I would have gone to trial, that's the thing back then. We're talking about the 90s now. And that's when it became known. So within that, 86 is when I got started. Within that 5-7 year period of time, that's when things were just stupid. And information was out there. Cops knew what was going on. And they were giving out basically like football scores of time to people, right? So that's when and now, even in the States to this day, it's still bad, especially when it comes to crack cocaine. There was a discrepancy or a difference between powder, there still is, and crack, which to this day, there's a fight on it because essentially it's the same. I won't get into the science of that, but it was 100 times more time that they were giving you for crack. You get caught with an ounce of crack as opposed to an ounce of powder, you're getting almost life. You might only get maybe 2 years for the powder. So it was just insane, that's a whole nother talk we can have. But, did the 8 years. And then that's when I got sent back to Canada. I was deported back.
Right. So how, the night that you guys are sending some stuff through the mail, which seems pretty, if you can get away with it, pretty efficient, right? I mean, you don't have to get caught driving with it and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's pretty smart.
That was awesome.
Yeah. So then when you showed up at this place and then you got caught, you went to trial and then had to spend 8 years in prison. What was that experience like? Because I know that a lot of people have all these sort of glorified or there are different levels to the prison
Absolutely.
system. So what was that experience like for you?
It was interesting. So I was probably in the game for a few years at that point, and when I finally got to where I did most of my time, which was in Colorado, you go in there and being from LA, you're seeing guys that you knew on the street from LA, and you're like, bro, I thought this is where you've been. It's, oh yeah, I've been here for 2 years, or I thought you were dead, and this and that, and what happened to you? And I'm not saying that to glorify it. It was, because there's other people that are impacted. And that's what I think about now. My mom and my dad, at the time I had a daughter. My son was just born while I was in jail as well. And so all those close family members are impacted. But I I was considered a pretty solid guy, right? So I didn't have any problems as far as you hear about being in prison. You hear about people getting raped and people getting killed, and it all happens for sure, especially at that level. But I didn't have any of those experiences, mainly because I knew a lot of people and I was respected in that regard. And again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but the 8 years that I was there I learned a lot. I went to school. I got a degree when I was down. I made the best use of it, and worked out. And that's where I really learned about training, and and I just took it further when I got out of there. But I was involved. You have activities. It's pretty much a city within a city, basically, right? So prisons are thousands of inmates. They have a food system. Probably the best example, Marcus, would be like a university. You just can't go out anywhere. You have a cafeteria, you have a gym, you have places where you sleep. You can go. There's activity you can go if you want to paint. They have a paint room. If you want to draw, library, all that stuff. But you're just dealing with a whole bunch of inmates and thugs and stuff like that, and gang members, and I've met mobsters, all that stuff. Especially when you're in the federal system, you have every gamut of criminal. And the feds back in the day was more known for white collar crimes back in the day. We'll say before I went in, back in maybe the 60s, 70s or whatever, tax evasion and things of that nature. But now when the drug, crack, cocaine, and the time they were giving out became more rampant, a lot of the jails were filled with drug dealers, and mainly because we weren't considered violent. You know what I mean? And another reason was because the government realized we can give more time if it's federal case. So state cases, there's different rules with the state. You have to be, hearsay isn't admissible, so I can't say, yeah, I saw Marcus doing this or whatever, without having proof. But in the feds, it's a little bit different. You don't necessarily need that exact proof. Someone can say something about you, and they'll investigate it, and then you may get charged in a conspiracy just because your name was involved. And you don't even have to be caught with anything. I wasn't caught with anything. So that's where it's different, but they can give so much more time. And that's what the government liked. They were able to give out life sentences in 30 years and 50 years. So being there, the 10 years that I got, I was blessed. I can't believe I'm saying that, because my cellmate that I had for 5 years had 25 years. I had friends that had 2 lives, Marcus, plus 30 years. And in the feds, life is life. So like here in Canada, they give you life, but you could possibly get parole when you're in 25 years or whatever. Life in the federal system is life. You do not go home. You go out in a pine box, basically is what they tell you. And there's no conjugal visits. So as much as people may think if you're married, it doesn't matter. You will never have intercourse with your wife for that life. So those things, they just knock you down. So it takes some mental strength for sure. What got me through is knowing that so many other people in my situation had much more time. Whether they were caught with more drugs, or maybe they had a violent, or maybe they had a record more than I did. So that got me through. I figured out a way to have an agenda throughout, as far as my daily routine. I worked in the kitchen, and I worked in the industry. I did a workout after work, showered, had my meal, and that was my 7 days a week. And it helped me get through. Did tons of reading. My folks were amazing. They came visiting me 3 times a year. My mom would come, then they would come together around Christmas, and then my dad would come, kind of split it up that way. So bad experience, yeah, for sure, because I was away from my family. I couldn't talk to them when I wanted to. Good experience in that I learned what I was made of to get through a situation that I created, but I was able to get through and come out of it, in a good way, coming back to Canada. And I was blessed that I was Canadian, so I come here and I don't have a record, right? So I was able to get my life started. No one really knew, what my life was like when I was living in the States. So those are the blessings, man. This is why when you see me, and we've talked before, that's why I'm always smiling.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and I one of the things that I admire most about you is the amount of ownership that you always make a point of saying, oh, my choice, or you make a point of saying, I made the most of and just taking ownership for your actions and things like that.
Absolutely.
You're the furthest thing from a victim in the situation that I've seen. And so then once you once you serve those 8 years and then you get out, did you start working? Did you start personal training? How did that look when you got out, kind of getting yourself back on your feet and integrating yourself into sort of everyday life again, which would just be wild after 8 years?
Totally. It was really wild, man. It was amazing because I was, when I got done with my time in Colorado, I was at Florence, Colorado, which is basically a complex of different types of prisons. And then once I got done with my time there, I had to go through immigration because I'm Canadian, right? So I had a detainer. So I go through immigration in Colorado, in Denver, and I was there for a month. And then in that, I realized Canadians were getting shipped out within a month, 4 weeks to 5 weeks. So I had my folks, my incredible folks, get a place for me in Vancouver. Because that's where I wanted to end up going. Because they ask you, believe it or not, where did you want to go? You're getting deported. Where in Canada do you want to go? You have one choice, two choices. First choice was Vancouver. Second choice was Toronto because I had my brother there. But ideally, I wanted to stay on the West Coast because my mom and dad were still in LA. And my daughter was in Seattle. So it made sense. At that point, my son was born. He was on the West Coast as well. So, yeah, I ended up working, doing doorman work initially. That was my first job. Connected with a buddy of mine that he's not like family to me, and it's quick story. We were in the Bay. My dad was still here. He hadn't left yet from when I first got home. It was an amazing welcoming with my mom and dad. It wasn't emotional, you know what I mean? Because they went, I put them through hell, but we survived, right? So it was time to move on. And we're in the Bay. My dad and I am shopping for some clothes because I didn't have anything, right? I didn't have anything.
Oh, the Bay, like the store, not in
the store.
San Francisco, right?
Yeah. No, the store here in at Metrotown in Vancouver, and this guy, my mom and dad are Jamaican, so my dad sees this young guy about my age wearing a Jamaican shirt, right? And he said, "You Jamaican?" He said, "Yeah, I'm Jamaican." And he said, "Oh, my son just got moved up here," and so we connect. We've been friends ever since. And he helped me get the job as a doorman because he was doing some doorman stuff at the clubs at downtown at Bar None. So I did that, and then I ended up getting a job at Costco for a while, and didn't like that, but I did it. Went back to school. I got you saw on my CV, I did my network administration program. It was a 2-year program. Did that, worked for a company in Richmond called Top Producer. It's a real estate. I'm not even sure if they're still around, but I did customer service for them for a year. And then I didn't really like it. Did some stuff on my own, some network administration stuff on my own, but it was hard. And that's when the .com, this was 2000, late 2000, 2001. That's when things went down with the computer industry, the .com industry. So it was hard to get work unless I had a computer science degree, which I didn't. I couldn't find any work. So I got into training. I ended up working with Innovative Fitness. They hired me on. I got my certification, and I had a pretty good background anyway from football days and all that. And got my NSCA and did my CSCS stuff because I was able to get that. And they hired me. So I worked at the Innovative downtown for just about 6 months or so. They wanted a huge commitment. At that time, my son was with me. He came up, and he was living with me at that time. So it was hard to commit like they wanted fully with having a son. And learned a lot from them, so I don't knock. I learned tons from Innovative as far as training and working in small spaces. They were great. And then I started working for the district of West Vancouver, doing personal training with them when I was there 13 years, and doing stuff on the side on my own as well. So that's kind of how I got into the industry, and I love it. I love what I do. We have our days. We're human, but for the most part, we can control our schedule, and I'm a giver, and I think you are as well. I love to help people, right? So, and I think it shows when I'm training, and I'm always trying to figure out what I can do to make this person better. And not everyone can do that, and we've met people that have all the science behind them, but they're not really givers, so I think you and I fall into that category. So that's what I've been doing ever since. Mm-hmm.
That's so cool, man. And I mean, yeah, just getting yourself back on your feet would just be such a tough process, and almost feeling like, I'm sure you're kind of playing from behind, but then you picked yourself up, you got into something that you were super passionate about with the training, and then folks are probably thinking, oh, okay, so that's sort of the end of the hardship stuff, but then something else comes up. You end up getting married, and I'll sort of let you take it away from there.
Yeah, no, for sure. So Elena, my wife, amazing woman. I say that just, from day one, and even before I went through this next drama, which I'm going to explain in just a second. So we connected back in 2000, and we finally got married. I wasn't probably the best boyfriend at first. I was still trying to figure things out, but she hung in there, and I'm so glad she did. And then we got married in 2012, and we now have a daughter. My daughter's 15 now, so amazing daughter. And we postponed this was September 2nd, 2012 is when we got married. We had planned our honeymoon to be in the new year, so spring, going to Mexico. We booked it. My mom had helped us out. That was a gift. She had timeshare and all that. So I'm like, perfect. We'll go to Cancun and Maya Riviera. 2 weeks, it was just going to be me and my wife. It would have been incredible because I hadn't had really a vacation like that in years, right? And then my mother-in-law, she ended up breaking her ankle because she was going to watch our daughter, right? And my daughter at the time was, I think, 9, and it just wasn't going to happen, right? So we're like, you know what? Nikayla can come. She can come. It'll be great. It'll be a family vacation, which is fine. It's great, So anyway, looking forward to the time comes. This is, what was this, April, March? I should remember these dates, Marcus. Maybe some sort of Anyway, talking about 2013, I believe it was March, and flying to Cancun. And we get to Cancun. I had been to Mexico a number of times. I had friends get married in Cabo. I think I'd been there 2 or 3 times prior. Traveled numerously, in that little period, which we didn't really touch on, but I started a company and I was traveling tons globally. And so there was no problem with me traveling. So anyway, on this trip, on the honeymoon trip, we get to Cancun, they refused me entry, right? So I'm really blown away by that. I'm truly in my mind, it's a mistake. Like, my wife's like, what's going on? They're already through. I'm getting pulled to the side and I have no idea what's going on. They're not telling me anything. Of course, there's that language barrier. They're not really, when it comes to anything more than passport and go through, it's a language barrier, right? So,
and at this point, you had been out for 15 years, served your time, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
This is just
pretty much
totally in the past as far as your last.
Totally in the past. Yeah, because I came back. You're right. Came back in 2000 to Canada, and this is 2013 at the time, right? So 13 years. Yeah, close to that, right? 13, 14 years. So, they're asking me have you been to Mexico before? And I'm like, yeah, I've been to Mexico. You can check, and they can look at my passport. And, oh yeah, I've been. And are you from the States? I'm like, no, I'm Canadian. I live in Vancouver. And anyway, questions go on and on and on. Next thing 45 minutes goes by. So my wife and daughter are like, what in the world is going on? And I'm like, I have no idea. So a few more minutes goes by. They tell me, Mr. Allen, we're sorry, you can't be admitted to Mexico. So of course I'm like, what's going on? And trying to keep my cool, and losing your cool is not going to help because you're dealing with federales, right? So they're sorry, we don't know. It's Saturday. The embassy is closed in Mexico City. We can't find out what's going on. I call a buddy of mine back in Vancouver who's from Mexico and has connections still. His brother and family is still in Guadalajara in Mexico, and they're very well connected in the government and all that. So I called my buddy Dave. I said, Dave, man, they're not letting me in. Maybe you can talk to them in Spanish. And he talks to them for about 30 minutes, Marcus, on my phone. And still, he says, Brian, man, you have to come back. They don't know what's going on. So I'm almost in tears, like, man, because I see my daughter's like, you can tell she's worried. And my wife is almost crying as well, what's going on. And I got to tell them, here's my cash. I had the cash in my pocket, take it, go to the resort. It's obviously a mistake. It's Saturday. Hopefully I'll be back by Monday. I'll go to the embassy, or Tuesday. I'll go back home, go to the embassy in Vancouver, clear things up, and fly back Monday night or come back Tuesday. So that's a little bit of a calm, but still kind of weird and worrisome, right? So I stay in the airport. I'm in the airport and still don't know what's going on. I'm being detained, essentially, Marcus, right? But they're not telling me if I'm charged with anything or if I did anything wrong. So I'm in the airport overnight, sleeping in these little raggedy chairs. I'm banging at 1 a.m. saying, man, you guys didn't give me no food. I'm starving, man. Big brother here, man. Give me some food. So they give me a sandwich, and then they wake me up at 5 a.m. for the next flight out. They rush me to the gate. I'm like, and I'm excited. I still have access to my phone, everything. Texting my wife saying, hey, I'm on the way out of here. This is great. I'll hopefully be there in a few days. And then they put me on the plane. The plane's already loaded. So that seemed kind of weird. I've never, I'm with this immigration guy, and I wasn't handcuffed. I wasn't handcuffed at all. So that's giving me relief. Totally. Obviously it's a mistake. So we're on the plane. The plane takes off. It's American Airlines. And, keep in mind that when I was deported back to Canada in 2000, I wasn't allowed to travel into the States. This is the reason why when I did travel those few times to any other places around the world into Mexico, it was always direct. And I always worked fine, no problems there. Anyway, the American Airlines flight, the flight attendant gets on the microphone and says, "Okay, we're on our way to Houston." And I'm like looking at the guy like, "Houston, like, man, Houston, what's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh shit, why are we going to the States?" Right? So I ask him. Of course, he can't talk English or doesn't want to talk to me. And then, of course, I'm trying to calm myself and saying, well, maybe it's just a layover or stopover that we're going to Vancouver. Text my wife, going to Houston with a question mark. She's like, really? And then we take off. Get to Houston, disembark. We're sitting in the back, so I'm one of the last to come off, grab my bag. And I'm thinking we're changing planes to get on the Vancouver flight. Man, Marcus, I get off, man, these two undercover guys come up in plain clothes and grab me. And they felt it, said, we needed two of us. You're a big guy.
Yeah. Well, just for the folks at home, you're what, like 6'1", 6'2"?
6'2", about 250. Yeah, I'm a big guy. I'm a pretty big guy. And
they need two dudes. They need two.
Yeah, exactly. They grabbed me and they said, you're under arrest. And I'm looking for the immigration guy. And Marcus, man, he did a ghost on me, man. He was gone. I'm like, well, this guy, and he's gone, right? Probably to catch the next flight back to Mexico, right?
Right.
So they grab me and they say, Mr. Allen, you're under arrest for murder. And I'm like looking around. What are you talking about? Murder. There must be a mistake. Same thing you would see on a TV show. There must be a mistake. You got the wrong guy. All those lines for sure. And
Straight out of a movie.
Straight out of a movie. And they grab me and they're trying to, they try to be cool. Because I'm a laid back guy. I'm not going to fight you. I'm in the airport and they're like, you're a big guy, but you play football, try to be cool. I'm like, I'm not trying to converse with you, man. I'm like, my life is like, what do you mean? I've just been arrested for murder. They take me in the back. The captain, which is a woman, comes in. She questions me. And did you ever live in the States at all? I said, well, yeah, I grew up in LA and this and that. Did you ever live in Seattle or Tacoma? I'm like, yeah, I used to many years, but then I got deported back after I did some federal time. I said, well, there's something that happened back in the 80s. Some guy was killed, and apparently your name came up, and there's a warrant for your arrest. I'm like, what the fuck? Seriously. So they can't give me much more. So I'm in Houston, and that's all she has as far as information. And then, my instincts kick in and realize, I should just be quiet. I don't have a lawyer here. So I'm like, this is crazy. I'm Canadian. The guys are trying to be cool. And they're like, you seem like you're a really nice guy. I don't know what happened. I said, I don't even know what happened, man. I think you got the wrong guy. Anyway, they take me to Houston jail. I'm in there for 10 days. And 10 days is the timeline before the extradition. So I'm hoping after 10 days, if no one comes to get me, the state that wants me, which is Washington State, because I'm in Texas, they have to let me go. So I'm like, fingers crossed. Like, man, this is truly a mistake. At that point, the whole time I'm there, I talked to my wife, my mom, my dad, and even got a hold of my old lawyer from when I did my federal time, and then he looks into it, and I get a little bit more information, and like, oh yeah, there was a killing, man, that happened in the 80s, and apparently you were around when it all happened. So I'm of course not saying much on the phone, man, this is crazy. And then finally they came and got me. Yeah, these extradition officers from Washington came and picked me up, because when they called my name in Houston, it was as if they said, Brian, roll up. Was what they say in order to leave. I'm thinking, man, shit, man, I'm getting out of here. I'm like, free. So that wasn't the case. The two guys were there. They apprehended me, handcuffed me, and took me to the airport. One thing about those situations, they always make it seem like it's all good. Like, oh, man, we had a good time. We were in Houston. We went to the Houston baseball game. And I'm like, man, I ain't trying to hear that shit.
Yeah, I do not give a shit.
Exactly. So they asked me a few questions, but my lawyer at the time, when I talked to him when I was in Houston, was saying, don't say anything. Your best weapon is to be quiet, and you can be nice. And anyway, they take me. I'm in, I think it's Bush Airport in Houston, and I'm there, and then I'm in handcuffs. I have a jacket over with these two white guys, and I'm a big guy, so people kind of know, like, what the fuck's going on. They feed me, handcuffed. I'm eating a hamburger, handcuffed, and then they fly me to Tacoma, and then I'm in Tacoma, and I go to court the next day, which if you could look at CTV and see that was when I was at that court date in Tacoma. And then that's when reality really set in. Like, you're being charged with murder one. They had you charged with murder one, first degree assault, murder two, and possession of a firearm. So I'm looking at 100 years. So I'm like, my bail's $2 million. I have the highest bail in jail, right? And I have not done anything wrong. I did my time, and I didn't do anything wrong even pertaining to this case. But it's a cold case, which, the listeners know that we're talking about a case that happened that they're trying to charge back in 88, 89.
And
so I'm 40 when I was 19. This is 2013, 27 years later, they bring this case up. So there was 4 of us in total, 5 co-defendants I had. 1 passed away, so there was 5 of us total. So it would have been 6 in total, right? And they were all guys I haven't seen in almost 30 years, and they don't have us in the same jail tank. They put me in the hole. The hole, basically, if listeners don't know, is basically 24 hours you're in there. You get an hour out. So 23 hours you're locked down. You get an hour out to shower, use the phone. And you're in there for I was in there for a week, 2 weeks. And it's basically a mental evaluation, which is hilarious.
It's a good way to drive somebody crazy, actually.
Oh, my gosh. And I'm laughing because, I can laugh now, but I'm laughing because they have a nurse that comes in there after you've been there for a few days and asks, Mr. Allen, how you doing in there? You good? You doing all right? And I'm like, not really.
Yeah, I guess as right. Good as I can be, but no, yeah, I'm not good. Right?
So she doesn't have any information. Then I finally get moved up, and then I get to where I was for 2 years. I was in jail fighting the case, and I can't say long story short, but two of my co-defendants took deals. I went all the way to trial. In trial, they offered me a deal. Just so listeners know, my involvement was nothing. I was there, true enough. My name was really well known in the city back in the day, which makes sense why my name came up. I was around when the shooting happened, for sure. I'm not denying that at all. Didn't have a weapon. Wasn't into carrying guns. Only for protection when I had to do deals, but I wasn't into carrying. I was always a little leery about it. And what I had to make clear was that it was a gang killing, and this is what made the news so big there, is because it was apparently the first gang killing in Tacoma. But I was trying to make clear to them that I could have stayed in LA if I was a gang member, man. Like, why would I come all the way 2,000 miles up north? I'm making $10,000 a day and start gangbanging. I could have stayed in Los Angeles where it started, or where one of the cities where it started, and just hung out.
And the weather's
But,
better.
when it comes to, it was a cold case, and it was a case that was big, and they wanted to charge it, right? And I, unfortunately, was collateral damage. And again, not one of my most proud moments, because I clearly remember that day and being leery about going back out. And the sad thing, too, Mark, is, and I don't think I told you when I told you the story initially, is that we all knew each other. So the guy that got killed, his cousin was hanging. I knew his cousin who I hung around with, and it was a crazy, crazy, crazy time in that city and America wide. And I just happened to get caught up, and I was in there for 2 years, like I mentioned. They ended up offering me a plea deal. I had to tell them what happened. I testified and told them the truth, and like I had been for the 2 years I was there. And they had to do a polygraph. I was the only one who had to do it, which was one of the hardest things in my life to do because it's very subjective. And I finally got released. But that right there, having done the 8 years, I brought that on myself. Even though I didn't get caught with anything, I was selling drugs. And just like you were saying earlier, I owned that, right? So I'm like, I did some time. Fair enough, I got caught. This one was a little bit different because I didn't do anything. I was around, fair enough. So being around doesn't help. And I admit that I sold drugs and I wasn't a good guy in Tacoma. But what they were trying to charge me with at that point was just insane. And scariest thing in my life, more than when I did the 8 years, because they were determined to give me 30 years. There was no you know what, you're from LA, we know you're a gang member. And to be clear, I was never initiated in to be a gang member. How it works, you can be affiliated. I grew up, you've been to LA, but LA has their areas where there's Bloods, there's Crips, there's 18th Street Mexicans, there's Mexican Mafia. depending on where you grew up. So those are your friends, right? And where I grew up was the Blood neighborhood. So I associated myself with them, but I was never initiated in to be a Blood or whatever, right? But that was their MO. You're a gang member. When they went to trial, because they didn't have much evidence, which is also scary, and this talks, brings back the point about corruption down there. There was they were using that gang thing as their MO for the jury. Gang, and it was huge back in the 80s. So people that were on the jury remember that 80s time when it was gangs and people from LA and drugs and shootings and all that. So that didn't help. So brilliant on the prosecution side, but it was erroneous because I wasn't a gang member. It was so bad that my dad, having worked for LA County, one of his good golfing buddies, started the gang task force in LA back in the 80s. He was willing to come testify on my behalf because if you're in a gang, they have knowledge of who you are. And then in LA, I don't know how it is here, there's a gang book, right? And if you're truly in a gang, you're in that book. And I wasn't in the gang. I was pretty much a nerdy athlete that got caught up selling drugs and trying to be hard and all that and make money and got caught up in a mess, right? So scariest 2 years of my life, especially when you're married and have a family. And, my he's fighting cancer. So, and it's a little bit worse now, but he's hanging in there. But back then I was worried. And those are the things you worry about when you're older. You're worried about something happening to my daughter, my kids, my wife, my mom, my dad, my friends. And thank God. And that's why, like I mentioned to you before, these are the blessings, man, because I came out and everyone's okay. I came out in one piece. I didn't come out, I won't say I'm not traumatized, but I've been able to function. This could turn somebody's mind around.
Absolutely.
They couldn't even function. When you're 1 minute, you turn your life around, you're part of the community. I'm helping out at my daughter's school and high schools. I'm training Argyle High School and, and doing all types of stuff. Next thing you know, I'm snatched up for something that they assume, I was involved in. And I'm looking at 30 years. And two of the guys, remember there was three of us that were left. I took the deal. Those two guys got 30 years. Well, 27, 26 years.
So crazy. Now, you were in jail for the second time was for 20 months total?
23 months.
23 months.
Just shy of 2 years. Yeah.
And this when you were telling me the story the first time, it seems like this judge sort of had a hard on for you and like made you do this polygraph sort of thing. So what ultimately got you off, and how did the prosecution and the court discover the truth, and what ultimately set you free at the end so you could actually go home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I thought, because how I am and how I am is how I carried myself when I was there. And I'll just go back a bit. It blew me away because I was so well respected in there. I mean, the sad thing is that some people that were older remembered, man, you're a Big B, man. I remember you. I remember you used to be on the east side. And so I had all this respect from these young kids that, oh, yeah, my uncle knows you. And this, I'm like, damn, I had that much of an impact in this town. And then even with the guards and even the lawyers were like, you're such a presentable and well-spoken guy, right? So even the judge got that vibe from me initially, and when I took the deal, the judge has to approve the deal. So the deal was time served. So at that time, it was like maybe 19 months. And this will be the charge. The charge was drive-by shooting. Even though I didn't have a gun, I was in the car. And they have to charge you with something that's according to the time you've been in. And at that time, that made sense, right? There wasn't too, they couldn't charge you with, I didn't have a record. I had a record from when I did the drug crime many years ago, but that had already fallen off. So I didn't have a record per se at the time. And so I felt I had a rapport with the judge. I was respectful. I was clean, and when I was in trial, I had a suit on. And then when I had all these letters from all my colleagues and clients and the community, he was blown away by that. Like 100 pages of letters of positive information about me, right? Which is incredible. Just on a side note, just to see that, it's almost as if you die and you're hearing your obituary from, you know what I mean? It's incredible. But so when I took the deal and I said my piece, the deal was for me to possibly do a polygraph, and I was cool with that because I was telling my truth, right? But there was a possibility. It wasn't guaranteed. So trial was ended, right? Didn't have to do the polygraph. I'm like, great, that's great. I'm done. I get time served. So I go for sentencing. This is in August 2014. So I had been in, I said 19, maybe 18 months at that time. So I'm like, my family's there, of course my wife. And, my daughter, she never came to Tacoma, and just so listeners know, I didn't see my daughter for those 2 years. It was a conscious choice between my wife and I for her not to see it. It ended up working out well. But anyway, my family was all there, friends were there. I go in front of the judge. The same judge, I thought we were cool. His name was Brian as well, Brian Shishkoff, but he spelled it with a Y. So now I see why he was a little crazy. But he says, Mr. Allen, I don't believe you. So, of course, I'm up there with my handcuffs. I'm like looking at my lawyer, confused. Even the prosecutor is like, huh? I think you had a gun. And I'm like, Your Honor, I didn't have a gun. There's no one, even my co-defendant said I didn't have a gun. No, this case is too crazy, and you were a pretty well-known drug dealer. I'm pretty sure you had a gun. I said, no, Your Honor, I didn't have a gun at that time. My lawyer is like, Your Honor, it's in the paperwork. Mr. Allen didn't have a gun. No, you know what? I don't want to hear it. Mr. Allen, I will sentence you today, and I will sentence you on the fact that you had a gun. So, of course, I'm like, what the fuck? My dad's ready to come over. He's like, what the hell are the people in the, I guess, the galley or whatever, are like, damn, what's going on? And then my lawyer's like, no. And then, or you do the polygraph. You pass the polygraph, Mr. Allen, you go home. You fail, I'm charging you with murder. So I'm like, what the? Talk about throwing
your whole life based on this polygraph. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm like traumatized, right? Like totally like just bummed out, which takes a lot for me, man. I'm like, oh my God. So my lawyer is like, I don't know what's going on. Even the prosecutor is like, Your Honor, we're happy with Mr. Allen's testimony. You can sentence him, he can go. No, it's got to do the polygraph. So I'm in there. So, the way the system works down there, things don't happen right away. So I go back to my cell. I'm in there for 2-3 more months before they organize the polygraph. And we do a couple polygraphs with my lawyer. He has a guy. And, I pass it, but it's not, there's a way where it can be inconclusive. So it's not truly passing and you're not failing. And that's not good enough. It can't be inconclusive. So I'm like really stressed out, like, oh my God, I'm telling the truth. And, that's where it's subjective, right? Because if you're nervous, you're not Marcus Sadu. I'm not Brian Allen. You could be so nervous where it says you're lying. And that's what makes polygraphs so that's why it's inadmissible in trials, right? Unless you agree to it, which I did. Anyway, I finally get called out. This is, at that time, the year has gone by. This is August when I first went to sentencing. By now it's December. January, and I finally, the time has come because there's been a whole bunch of continuances. Holiday season came around. Unless all the lawyers are available, they won't do it, and this and that. So I finally do the test. They set a date. 2 officers take me to the police station. They actually have a polygraph room, which is like a closet. And I swear they designed it so you fail. I mean, it must be like 30 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees in there. The guys give me a spiel like, yeah, my grandfather was a polygrapher, my dad, and I've been doing this 30 years. So whatever you think you might have planned, don't do it. I've seen all the tricks. I'm like, I just want to tell you the truth. So, and how it works is there's 4 or 5 senses that they go by. You sit on something. It's like a sphincter. So you know how you squeeze your ass cheeks, right? So you sit on this pad. That's one sensor. They have your breathing sensor as well, and also a heart rate cuff or blood pressure cuff, and they also have a sweat indicator on your fingertips. So it's 4. So those are the different things you put on. You're already nervous just from that alone. You're already sweating, right? So anyway, he asked me these questions, and he's actually ended up being all right, guys. And the way he asked me the questions, it was more along the lines of what you testify was at the truth as opposed to details. Because he's like, it's 30 years ago. No one remembers the details. And I was like, well, yeah, I agree. But I mean, whatever, So he asked me these questions. Long story short, he said, Mr. Allen, we're done. So how do you think you did? And I'm like super nervous. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I passed. I was telling you the truth. He said, well, that's all I wanted to hear. You passed. Man, I almost did a flip. If my big ass does a flip, that's a hell of a flip.
Yeah, no kidding.
I started crying, man. Broke down, bawling, man. Because I was so... All I could think about, Marcus, was if I fail, I'm about to get tons of time because he's going to charge me with murder. And then my wife, my daughter. There were so many factors that was like, oh, my God, there's so many things in the balance here, right? Just based on this one. And the sad thing is, I was the only one. I was the most credible. These guys, all my co-defendants, which I didn't say earlier, were still in and out of trouble, still doing time, still selling drugs. Me, I was completely changed my life, right? Bought a house, lived in Vancouver, like as I mentioned, part of the community, training, working at schools. I was the only one who did the polygraph. So I passed it. And then again, that was a higher power. You know, I knew I was telling the truth, but those things, like I said, are subjective. And that was it, man. That weekend, that was a Friday, immediately the judge said, all right. And even then, when I went to court that Friday, the judge was still like, well, you know, the questions that were asked, Mr. Allen, weren't really the ones I was hoping for. Man, the prosecution, Marcus, not my lawyer. The prosecution was like, Your Honor, come on, man. Like, seriously?
Yeah, from my understanding, that's not even the judge's job, is it? It's
not.
Yeah, it's the prosecution's job, and they were saying, let this guy go.
Yeah.
So wild.
So wild. So even my mom, she's kind of losing her hearing in one ear, and she was like almost losing it because she's thinking she's hearing, no, it's not, you know, he's going back to jail. She's like, what's going on? What's going on? So thank God he finally said, you know what, Mr. Allen, you seem like a really good guy. You're very well educated, you're smart, and you've had your life going for you. I wish you the best. And that was it. And the prosecutor came over and shook my hand, which is kind of unheard of usually, right?
Right.
Said, wow. I wish you the best. My lawyer passed me on the back. And again, this is Friday, and then I stay in that jail that weekend. They ship me to immigration on Monday. And then by that following Friday, I'm back in Canada. I'm at Kiss the Ground. And it's been history ever since. You know, it took me all these years. I've been home now since, this is 2015 at the time. So now it's 2018. So it's been basically almost 4 years where I've been able to kind of, you know, tell my story. The first couple of years, it was tough because, you know, it was emotional. I think about my, you know, my wife and my mom and my dad and all that they went through. It was hard, man, right?
So now you've gotten off finally. You take the polygraph, you pass. The judge says, good luck, you're a stand-up dude. And now you sort of have to, after, you know, 23 months, have to almost get back on your feet again. So how did you go about sort of reinventing yourself another time?
You know what's amazing is that when I got home, I was working for the District of West Vancouver when this all happened. And I went back to them. It's a contractual type of agreement, so I would have had to reapply anyway, or they had to give me a new contract. And they would have hired me but I had to go through some hoops a little bit. And I felt that maybe it was time to move on anyway. So I didn't push it. And my thinking was, at the time anyway, was, you know, I know what happened. I know I'm a good guy. I just don't want, it's a community center. My thinking was, I don't want people to have in their mind that, you know, what really happened? I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? That was more me, more my stuff. So I just said, you know what, I'm good. I'm going to move on. I ended up working with the District of North Vancouver and doing the same thing I was doing before, training and being a supervisor on the floor. The blessing in that is that after all that, the North Shore, whether it's West Van or North Van, or people that I work with, Bodyco, Chris, and, you know, embraced me. I mean, I just picked up where I left off. True enough, we lost everything, lost the house, lost my car. We had to start from scratch. But as far as work, I got hired right back within 6 months. I had to redo my certification because it had been a couple of years. But I got hired with the District of North Vancouver, with whom I work with now, and then I'm back working, doing private stuff, as you know, at Bodyco and other stuff as well. And now we're totally in a better place. We're renting. We don't own anything now, but we realized that if we didn't own that house prior to the situation, then legal fees were $300,000 US, right? So we needed the house. Thank God we had the house. I look at it from that perspective, and I keep saying it. Those are the blessings, man, right? Because I could be like, man, shit, The house could have been worth, 1.8 million like they are here in Vancouver now because we bought it for like 500 grand, right? But at the same token, I say to myself, if we didn't have the house, I wouldn't be here.
Right.
So those are the things that I'm like, and oh, we don't have any money. Well, I got hired back, and no one questions, they just all say, damn US, man, I'm so glad you're back. And so they threw a party for me, man. Like I had like 60 people, old clients and friends that threw a welcoming party for me within the first month that I got home. And again, this is the reason why I'm a pretty loyal guy. He said, just, work 3 or 4 months. Don't worry about it. Build your client base up. Those are amazing things. And I really don't take those things lightly. And everyone embraced me, man. And, that's why I want to give back, because a lot of people go through these situations and they're super the negative. They can't get ahead. They're having to go talk to a psychiatrist or a counselor because they're so stressed out, or their wife has left them, or their kids have turned. That was a worry. I was worried about my daughter just going the other way. She thrived when I was gone, man. She's an amazing being. My son, he's healthy and he's doing well, right? So those are things I think about. All the positive, meeting good people like yourself, and those are positive things, man. And I think those are, again, blessings, man. That's why it's so important that I want to get out there, whether it's only a few people, it maybe doesn't pan out like I hope, but just to tell them, look, it's all the decisions you make. It's not just about my story. Everyone has a story. Everyone's done something stupid and barely got away with it, or maybe got caught and did time or whatever. But if I can get out there and let kids and even parents know that it just takes a split decision for something to change your life. Could be for the positive for some. Maybe it was a certain stock, like you weren't sure, you bought it anyway, and then all of a sudden it boomed. Or like me, hanging out, selling drugs, and 1 minute when I knew it probably isn't going to end well, but it's all good. I know these guys. Next thing you know, 27 years later. And it's even worse now because of social media. So if kids can realize that no one's invincible, and I guess the question that these kids need to be asked is, how are you going to look upon your life back in the day when you were younger, when you're older? How are you going to tell your kids when they ask you, like when you were 19, Dad, what were you doing? When you went to jail, and you know what I mean? So if I could let them know that you may think you're invincible now, but you have no idea what may come later. And you may not even see it now. Someone may, you're now a lawyer or a doctor or even a judge or whatever, right? And someone goes through your Facebook, and they go back 10 years or 15 years, which they will be able to with the timeline. And they say, oh, man, what the hell? You're holding guns and you're smoking and whatever the case may be. And then, so they just need to realize that the impact of one's life can change overnight based on a decision you did when you were younger, and you won't even realize it until it's too late. And I'm a prime example of that. And luckily, I came out of it fairly in a good way. Well, in a great way, because I'm home and I'm with my family. But that's the point I want to get across to those that I speak to. Again, not just my story, but just choices, and how choices can really impact you later, much later in life, almost 30 years for me, so.
Yeah, man. And I think a couple of the biggest takeaways from you and what you've gone through is, it would be so easy, especially the second time around, to sort of get caught up in a rut, feeling sorry for yourself. And I'm sure you had those times as well. You obviously had a lot of time to think on this stuff, but how did you sort of maintain perspective, and how are you continuing to maintain perspective? Not even positive thinking as much, but just the accountability, the ownership, and then looking back and having just an awesome outlook on this whole situation and using it as an opportunity to grow and improve as opposed to, getting stuck.
Yeah, I think it's truly a testament of my family for sure, and friends and community. The support I had when I was there, man, it was mind-blowing, Marcus, man. Like, even the guards that were there were like, man, like, who are you? Like, you get more visits than people that live here. I had visits almost every week, literally. Now, letters coming in. I had 3 or 4 different magazines coming in from friends that were like, I'll get you a subscription. I had the New York Times come in, which isn't cheap, from, a good friend of Elena's who's also a friend of mine as well. And so just the support. I never had a time where there wasn't someone to support me. and give me, I'm already a pretty positive guy, but you're right though. You can have in those moments, you're only human, so you can really have a down time, right? That's what got me through. And even when I came home, all the support. That's why I realized how important it is to be involved in your community and embrace your community if you can. And that's what I love about Vancouver. LA is not quite like that. Everyone feels like your neighbor has an agenda, so you don't get that community feel. And probably because it's a big city and there's craziness there, right? So it's kind of sad in that regard. But here, and you probably see it, people know each other. They see you and they embrace you, and you probably know your neighbor. And I know my neighbors where I live here, and they all support me. And that's pretty much what got me through. And it may not work for everybody, but definitely worked for me as far as giving me the strength to kind of persevere through and put all that craziness and bad incidences that happened to me behind me. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing, man. So moving forward, and as far as exploring some of, talking to kids and potentially doing some speaking engagements and stuff like that, what are some of the things that you'd like to touch on around your experience? And then, what would you tell the 19-year-old you at this point, right?
Well, I can definitely let them know I've been there. What's great about, I don't know if great's the word, but I have a CTV video of me. This is me, man. This is me. This is what happened to me 27 years later. I was in the game, did time for that, and then I got home, got my life together, came back to Canada. I would show them all that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, is most of the kids that are involved in that type of lifestyle, they're pretty smart kids. You got to have some sense. And I don't know their backgrounds, so everyone's going to be different. My background, as I mentioned, my parents were middle class, and I didn't want it for anything. But I want kids to realize that the choices you make now, there's never been a time in history where things are so open and available for anyone, especially in cyberspace. And the kids need to realize that, man, there's no privacy, man. Like, when this all happened to me, there wasn't as many cell phones, there wasn't social media, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't people taking pictures of everything. This case came up based on just hearsay and what people thought happened 27 years later. Can you imagine how a case will be 27 years from now?
True.
So kids need to realize that all that you're doing, someone's probably got it on tape. And so when you get your life together, go back to school, whatever you decide to do, if you live, because you're dealing with guys shooting and gangs and all that, you have no idea what may happen when you're with your family, at church maybe, on a trip possibly with your daughter or your son and your wife, and all of a sudden you're getting arrested for something you did when you were 19, but you're now 30 or 40 or 50. And you can't beat it because they got it on video, and you didn't even know they had a video.
Right.
So, that may not happen to everyone, but there's a high chance of those things happening now because everyone's so connected. So it's all down to choices. So that's what I want to get across is I'm gonna have kids telling me, well, you got caught, you were slipping, you weren't that smart. Obviously not. I wasn't a great drug dealer. I got caught. But you can't be in that game, whether it's gangs or drug dealing, without other people knowing what you're doing. And it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time, whether you get caught and go to jail or get killed. So it all comes down to choices. So if you can just take another moment when you're about to do something stupid and maybe sit back and say, shit, maybe there's a possibility. I may get away with it now, but am I really getting away with it? Maybe it'll come back to haunt me later. It's tough. It'll be a tough sell. I think, because I know kids don't think about 5 or 10 years down the road. But I'm hoping that I'm credible enough when I show them the video. When I have some old pictures of when I was in doing my federal time, and guys, we took a photo, which I kind of regret doing now, but I was still young. Some gang guys I knew, we took a photo, and when I show them that and say, look, I wasn't a dumb guy, and look what happened to me, and then later on, look what happened to me as well. I'm hoping that will be an impact, and they can kind of take from that and maybe learn, and maybe I can mentor and teach them about making right decisions at the younger age.
Absolutely, man. That's incredible stuff. And now, where can folks contact you? Social media handles, emails, all that good stuff. Where can folks get in contact with you if they'd like to?
You know what? I'll give you my emails. The funny thing about social media and me, Marcus, is I need to work on that. And I know that people might think, well, what do you mean? You don't have a Facebook? I do have a Facebook handle. I think I even have an Instagram. I don't ever use it. And quickly, the reason why is when all this happened, and when you see the pictures and the footage on the news, they were all from my wedding. And it was a Facebook account that my photographer had. And I was like, man, I am banning Facebook. I'm never using it again. So you can't do that. Social media is where things are. But I do have my email address, which is Brian, Brian, at noexcuse.ca. And that would be the best way. And then anyone that does or is interested in connecting with me down the road, I'll have my social media handle for right now, just my email for now.
Yeah, totally understandable, man. Yeah, I get that. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for sharing your story, the insights, struggles, successes, all of that stuff, man. I love your perspective and your outlook.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome.
Have a good. All right.
I'll catch you guys on the next episode.